He was our father. My dad screamed it across the conference table, spit hitting the polished walnut. And I didn't flinch. The man he was screaming about had been my grandfather. For 5 years, my parents never called him because they missed him, not on his birthday, not at Christmas, not the day his cardiologist said the word hospice. They called when they wanted money, paperwork, or a way into the house. They skipped his funeral for a Caribbean cruise they had booked at 50% off. While the priest read the eulogy, my mother was posting selfies in a yellow sundress with a margarita and the caption, "Freedom." Now they were back in Connecticut, screaming about the house and the $1.1 million they had never earned the right to touch. I slid a black USB across the table. 6 folders. 5 years. I'd been waiting to press play. My dad's lawyer was still smiling. He wouldn't be for long. If this story is already hitting you in the chest, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. I'm Marnie, 32, and this is the story of the 5 years no one called my grandfather until they smelled money. Let's go back to February 2021, when his heart first gave out. The call came in at 5:43 in the morning. I was on a night shift at Hartford Hospital, halfway through 12 hours in the ICU, when the charge nurse waved me over to the desk phone. She wouldn't look at me. She just held the receiver out and said, "It's about your grandfather." The woman on the line introduced herself as a triage RN at Hartford General, downtown. She told me Henry Whitlock had come in by ambulance at 4:28 that morning. Acute, decompensated heart failure. They had him stable. Barely. "Has my father been notified?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. A long one. "We tried. Twice. He didn't pick up. I drove the 21 miles down 84 in a coat I hadn't buttoned and shoes I would later find I had put on the wrong feet. The whole way I called my father. 5 rings, voicemail, 6 rings, voicemail. On the 7th try, my mother picked up. "Marnie, what is it? It's 6 in the morning." "Grandpa's in the hospital," I said. "Heart attack. He's at Hartford General. They couldn't reach Dad. Your father is in D.C., she said, in the same tone she used when correcting the housekeeper. "He's at a conference. I'm not going to wake him." "Mom, I'll come down when I can. There's traffic on the Merritt." There was no traffic on the Merritt at 6 in the morning. I hung up. When I got to the hospital, my grandfather was propped up at 30 degrees in a bed that was too small for him. His skin was the color of wet newspaper. He saw me and his eyes did this thing they always did when he was relieved. Like his face was a window that had been stuck and someone finally cracked it open. He tried to lift a hand. The IV line caught on the rail. "Hi, Pop," I said. I took his hand instead. He closed his eyes. I sat with him until the cardiologist came around at 9. The cardiologist explained what congestive heart failure was, even though he could see from my badge that I knew. He explained ejection fraction, fluid retention, the goal of comfort, plus continued treatment. He said we'd talk about discharge planning in 3 days. He said it would be helpful to involve my grandfather's son. I told him my father was in D.C. He nodded slowly, the way only doctors who have been on this job a long time nod, and said, "Of course." My mother arrived at 4:18 in the afternoon, 11 hours after the call. I watched her from the doorway of the family lounge. She stopped at the cafeteria first. She bought a small black coffee. She drank it standing at the cashier. Then she went to the women's room. Then she came back to the second floor and stopped at the nurse's station and asked, in a voice loud enough for me to hear, "Which floor has the better cardiac unit? Because I'd like him transferred." She had not been into my grandfather's room yet. She walked past me to the mirror outside the bathroom and reapplied her lipstick, a deep raisin red. She blotted her lips on a tissue and dropped the tissue in the wastebasket, and finally turned to me. "Where is he?" she said. 211. "Has the lawyer been here?" "No, Mom. He just had a heart attack. I know what he had." She fixed her cuff. "I'm just asking." She walked past me into room 211, kissed Henry once on the forehead, asked the nurse what the prognosis was, then stepped into the hall and called my father. Their conversation lasted 4 minutes. I heard the words comfort, facility, and estate. I didn't hear the word dad. When she came back in, she smiled at me and said, "Your father is taking the Saturday train. He has the conference." She left at 6. I stayed at Henry's bedside until they kicked me out at 10 and let me back in at 6 the next morning. I slept in the recliner on 3 of the next 4 nights. The 4th night, I slept on the floor of the family lounge with my jacket over my face. The cardiologist learned my name. The respiratory therapist learned my coffee order. A custodian named Reuben learned that I cried in the second-floor stairwell at exactly 4 a.m. and started leaving a folded paper towel on the railing for me, which is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in a hospital that wasn't part of someone's paycheck. My father called on Saturday afternoon from the train. He asked how Pop was doing. I told him Pop was awake and talking. He said, "Great. Listen, Cynthia and I think we should meet with Mr. Halloran first thing Monday to get a few things in order. Healthcare proxy, all that. Pop's going to need a lot of support. Let's get the structure ready before he comes home." I said, "Dad, Mr. Halloran isn't Pop's lawyer. He's yours." He said, "Sweetheart, we're family. We all want what's best." I hung up. I went back into room 211. My grandfather was awake. He looked at me. He said, "Was that Douglas?" I said, "Yes, Pop." He said, "Did he ask how I was?" I lied. I said, "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked at the ceiling. He said, "Marnie Bird, when I get out of here, I want to see Kenneth Pruitt." Quietly. He closed his eyes. He did not ask me again, in the whole 5 years that followed, whether my father had ever asked how he was. The first thing my grandfather ever taught me to do was lie still under a quilt and listen. I was 4. We were in the back bedroom of his house in Bridgewater, the one with the slanted ceiling and the radiator that hissed like a kettle. And he had laid me on the quilt and said, "Hush now, Marnie Bird, tell me what you hear." I told him I heard the radiator. He said, "What else?" I told him I heard the wind in the maple. He said, "What else?" I told him I heard his clock. He said, "Good, now tell me what's missing." I listened for a long time. I told him I couldn't hear cars. He said, "That's right. You can't hear cars at my house. That's how you'll always know you're safe." He was a high school history teacher for 35 years. He retired at 68 and spent his afternoons in the garden behind the kitchen, his evenings reading Shelby Foote with a glass of milk. He had married my grandmother, Helen, in 1968 in a small Presbyterian church in Cheshire, and he had loved her with the kind of unbroken patience my mother thought was weakness and I thought was the only real love I had ever seen in a grown man. Helen died in September 2011, ovarian cancer, after a year of treatment that my mother visited exactly once. I was 17 at that funeral. I remember my mother standing in the receiving line in a black sheath and pearls, accepting condolences from people she had not bothered to learn the names of, while my grandfather stood by the casket alone. I remember my father in the back pew checking his BlackBerry. I remember thinking, no one is holding him, so I went and held him. That was the day Henry Whitlock became my grandfather in the way the word actually means. After Helen died, every Sunday for the next 10 years, I drove from college and then from my nursing program, and then from my ICU apartment, the 46 minutes up Route 8 to Bridgewater. I brought him pot roast, and he brought me history. He read me Lincoln's letters out loud, and he told me that the best thing his 35 years of teaching had taught him was that adults are just children who have learned how to lie politely. At my grandmother's funeral, my mother had stood for 40 minutes at the church doors greeting strangers as if she were the host of a charity gala. She wore a black sheath dress and her pearls and a small black hat. She did not weep. She did not enter the sanctuary until the third hymn. My grandfather stood by the casket alone, in his good gray suit, his hand on the wood. He did not speak. I watched my father walk past him twice without touching him. I left my pew. I went to the casket. I stood next to my grandfather, and I put my arm through his. He did not look down at me. He whispered, "Marnie Bird, thank you for coming over." That's the sentence I have carried for 15 years. Thank you for coming over. Like it was a favor to stand next to him at his wife's coffin. Like he had been counting on no one. My parents took their time with him too, in their own way. They took the time to make him feel embarrassed. Thanksgiving 2018, my mother set the dining room table for 12. She set the kitchen counter for 1. She told my grandfather sweetly that the cloth napkins didn't stretch to a 13th seat. So would he mind eating in the kitchen this year? My grandfather smiled. My grandfather said, "Of course, Cynthia." He picked up his plate and he walked into the kitchen. I picked up my plate and I followed him. My mother followed me to the kitchen door and hissed, "Don't make a scene, Marnie." I shut the door in her face. My grandfather and I ate at the kitchen island. He didn't mention it. We talked about a book he was reading, about a Union general from Maine. He laughed at his own joke. At the end of the meal, he put his hand on top of mine and said, "Thank you for sitting with me, sweetheart." In the dining room, my parents were laughing at someone else's joke. That was the year I started understanding what kind of family I had been born into. Now back to the hospital. Night 1, February 18th, 2021. I was sitting in the vinyl recliner at 3 a.m, half watching the cardiac monitor, when a hospice nurse I had never seen before opened the door. She wore a maroon cardigan and had the careful smile of a woman whose job was to be liked. "Hi," she said. "I'm Maggie O'Donnell. I'm with Greenbrook Hospice. Mrs. Whitlock asked me to come tonight to discuss comfort care." I looked at her. I looked at the chart. I looked at her again. "My mother asked you to come," I said. "Yes, about a transition to comfort care only, no further intervention. My grandfather is a fall risk on a diuretic," I said, "and he's been here for 19 hours. His ejection fraction is 35. He has not signed a DNR. He has not declined treatment. There is no comfort care order in this chart because no one has the authority to make one but him. And he's currently asleep. She smiled the smile again. Mrs. Whitlock said she had power of attorney. My mother does not have power of attorney. She said she would be bringing the paperwork tomorrow. I stood up. You can leave now, I said. She left. I sat back down in the recliner and watched my grandfather breathe, and I thought, when did my mother sign comfort care papers for a man who was talking about the New York Times crossword yesterday? I did not know yet that the answer was she hadn't. She was planning to. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep. My father walked into room 211 on Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021, 13 days after the heart attack, carrying a brown leather briefcase. He had not come during the first 12 days of my grandfather's admission. He had not returned the cardiologist's calls. But on the morning Henry's team finally said he could go home, with close follow-up, my father chose that moment to arrive, smiling. Hey, Pop. Hey, sweetheart, I brought lunch. Sweetheart. He had not called me sweetheart since I was 11. He set a tray of turkey sandwiches on the windowsill and pulled a chair close to my grandfather's bed. Then he opened the briefcase on the rolling tray table. Pop, listen, we need to think practical. With your health the way it is, with Marnie having a career, we should make sure all the household things are in order. I had Brent Halloran draft up a few documents, just simple stuff, just to make sure the house is taken care of if anything happens. It's a formality. My grandfather, whose hand was still bandaged from the IV and whose discharge papers were folded at his bedside, said, What documents, Douglas? Just a transfer on death deed. Quick claim, nothing dramatic, so that you don't have to deal with probate. Easy. He slid a stack of papers across the tray table. He had already filled in the blanks. The grantee was Douglas H. Whitlock and Cynthia M. Whitlock, joint tenants, with right of survivorship. I picked up the stack. I read every page. My grandfather watched me read. When I finished, I set it down and said, Dad, this is a quit claim deed transferring Bridgewater to you and Mom today. The transfer on death page is missing. His smile flickered. My grandfather said, Douglas, I don't think I'll be signing anything today. My father stood up. Pop, please, I'm trying to help. You just had a heart attack. You need to let us handle this. My grandfather said calmly, I am not confused. Maggie O'Donnell appeared in the doorway. She had been asked to consult about comfort care on Henry's first night, and had stayed long enough to learn that he was still making his own decisions. Mr. Whitlock, she said, looking at the papers, do you want this conversation documented? My grandfather looked at my father. Then he looked at Maggie. Yes, he said. My father gathered the papers very neatly, snapped the briefcase shut, and said, in a voice I had not heard from him since I was 13, We'll talk about this when you're feeling better. He walked into the hallway, called my mother on speaker, and I heard him say, She killed it. We'll do it again at the house in a week. My grandfather watched the doorway after he was gone. He'll be back, he said. I know, Pop. With more papers. I know. That afternoon, at my grandfather's instruction, I called Kenneth Pruitt. Pruitt asked me to save the papers my father had left behind. He sent Hartford General a written preservation request for Maggie's incident report and the security footage from room 211. "We may never need it," he told Henry, "but you should not have to rely on memory." 3 days later, when Henry was discharged to Bridgewater, I gave my notice at Hartford ICU. My charge nurse, a woman named Annette, who had once worked 36 straight hours during a sepsis outbreak, looked at me for a long time and then said, "You're going to be the best in-home RN that family has ever seen. Don't lose your license. Document everything." I called my landlord. I broke the lease on my apartment in the Asylum Hill neighborhood. I lost the deposit. I packed up my cat, Cricket, and a single suitcase, and I drove to Bridgewater. My grandfather watched me unpack from the doorway of the guest room. "Sweetheart," he said, "your parents are going to be furious." "Let them be furious," I said. He stood there for a long time. Then he said, in the voice he had used when I was 4 and listening to the radiator, "Thank you, Marnie Bird." He went and made tea. That was the first night I spent in the house I would live in for the next 5 years. The thing nobody tells you about caring for someone with congestive heart failure is that it is mostly small. It is weighing them every morning before breakfast, because 2 pounds of gain overnight means fluid, and fluid means a call to the cardiologist. It is portioning sodium to 2,000 milligrams a day, and learning that the best Italian sub in Bridgewater is a betrayal that costs a hospital admission. It is the white paper cup of meds at 7 a.m., and the second one at 4 p.m., and the third at 9. And the way you start to feel a small private joy when a man you love drinks a glass of milk without coughing. By the summer of 2021, my grandfather had walked, with my arm at his elbow, from the porch to the mailbox and back. By Thanksgiving, he was tying his own shoes. By Christmas, he was back to reading 3 hours a day. And he and Cricket had developed an arrangement in which Cricket sat on the open book, and my grandfather read around her. We did Thanksgiving 2021, just the two of us. I roasted a small turkey. He made cornbread from his mother's recipe. We ate at the dining table. No one sat in the kitchen. The doorbell rang at 3 p.m. It was my parents. I had not seen either of them since the day my father tried to slide a quitclaim deed across the coffee table. My mother had not called. My father had not called. They had not sent a card. And now there they were, on the porch, holding a pumpkin pie from Stu Leonard's and smiling like people who had read an article about how to be reconciled. "We were in the area," my mother said. "You are never in the area of Bridgewater, Connecticut. When you live in Larchmont, New York, you drive there for one reason, and one reason only." "Come in, Cynthia," my grandfather said. She kissed him on the forehead. I watched her press her lips to his skin. It was the first time I had seen her touch him with anything that looked like affection in 8 years. She straightened up and said, "Pop, we need a favor." The favor was $8,000. Business taxes. My father was being audited. They needed a short-term bridge. They would pay it back in February, with interest. My grandfather smiled. He walked slowly into his office. He came back with his checkbook and a small yellow notebook. He wrote out a check for $8,000 in handwriting that had not changed since he was 30. He handed it to my father. He sat down at the dining table and opened the yellow notebook to the next blank line, and he wrote in pencil, "November 2021, D and C, $8,000. Business taxes." He closed the notebook. He stood up. He kissed my mother on the cheek and said, "Drive safe, Cynthia. The merit has deer in the dark." She kissed him on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Pop. You're the best." When they were gone, I sat down at the table next to him and said, "Are they going to pay you back?" He took his glasses off and polished them on his sweater. "No, sweetheart," he said. "They never have." I stared at him. "How many times?" He opened the notebook. He flipped backward through the pages. There were rows and rows of entries going back to the year I had finished high school. D and C, $4,500. Kitchen renovation. D and C, $3,000. Dental practice software. D and C, $7,200. Vivian's summer abroad. My cousin Vivian had never been abroad in the summer. He let me read. When I looked up, he said very softly, "I keep the book because I want them to ask me to lend them money. I want them to come to my door. I want to see the size of the hole. And I want a record." "Pop, why?" He closed the book. "Because I'm a history teacher, Marnie Bird," he said. "And I know what every empire forgets. The kindness you ignored is the bill that comes due." He put the notebook back in the office drawer. I did not understand yet what he meant. I would. In April 2023, Lawrence Bremer came to dinner. Larry was 80 then, a retired physics teacher who had taught at the same high school as my grandfather for 30 years. He was the only person who had visited my grandfather in the hospital in February 2021 besides me. He came every other Wednesday, drank Henry's coffee, played chess on the porch in good weather, at the kitchen table in bad, and called my grandfather Wit. That April night, he came in carrying a small black object the size of a stick of gum. He didn't take his coat off. "Wit," he said, "I need you to sit down. I made tea." Larry made the two of them sit at the kitchen table. He set the black object on the table. He told my grandfather that his wife, Pamela, had been to the Bridgewater Country Club Wine Club 2 Thursdays ago. He told us that Pamela had brought a small audio recorder she had bought for transcribing her book club notes, and she had forgotten to turn it off when she put it in her purse before driving home. He told us that he had pulled the file off the recorder the next morning, and he had listened to it because that is what physics teachers do. They check things. He pressed play. The audio was clear. I heard glasses clinking. I heard my mother laughing. I heard the voices of 3 other women I did not know. I heard one of those women say, "How's Pop, Sin?" I heard my mother say, "Oh, he's hanging in, you know." I heard her sigh. I heard her say, honestly, "I pray he goes soon. Dragging this out is cruel to us." The other women laughed. The recording stopped. My grandfather sat very still. He did not cry. He did not curse. He did not pick up the recorder. He sat with his hands flat on the kitchen table, and he stared at the salt shaker for a long, long time. Then he turned to me. "Marnie Bird," he said, "go get my notebook." I got the yellow notebook. He turned to a blank page. He clicked his pencil. He wrote, in a hand that did not shake, April 2023, Wine Club, Bridgewater, CC. "Cynthia, I pray he goes soon. Dragging this out is cruel to us. Witness, P. Bremer. Recording via L. Bremer." He closed the book. He turned to Larry. "Larry, could you copy that file to a flash drive for me?" Larry nodded. My grandfather turned to me. "Sweetheart," he said, "tomorrow morning I'd like you to drive me to Kenneth Pruitt's office. I want to redo my will, and I want him to help me build something." I asked him what he wanted to build. He said very calmly, a USB. That was the first time I ever heard him use those 3 letters. I made him another cup of tea. He drank it. Larry stayed, and the 3 of us played 1 round of cards. When Larry left at 9, my grandfather walked him to the door, shook his hand, and said, "Pam is a good woman. Thank her for me." Carefully, he shut the door. He turned to me. He looked for the first time in 2 years tired. "Marnie," he said, "if they want my house when I'm gone, they will have to ask my voice for it from beyond. And my voice will say no, with every name and every dollar attached. That's how a history teacher does an inheritance." I made him go to bed. I sat in his recliner until 2 in the morning, listening to the radiator, listening to the wind in the maple. I tried to hear what was missing. I knew what was missing now. Kindness. In our family, kindness had always been the thing that was missing. Kenneth Pruitt was 67 years old, gray-haired, slow-moving, the kind of estate attorney whose office smelled like old books and lemon oil. He had drafted my grandmother's will in 1998. He had drafted Henry's first will in 1999. He knew our family. He listened to the audio one time, with the door closed. When it was done, he sat very still. Then he said, "Henry, what do you want?" My grandfather said, "I want to gather the evidence. I want to redo the will. I want a no contest clause. I want my granddaughter to inherit. I want a small donation to Hartford Hospice in my name. And I want one more thing." Pruitt waited. "I want them in the room when she presses play." Pruitt set the recorder down. He picked up a yellow legal pad. He uncapped a pen. "All right," he said, "let's build it." We went home that afternoon and we started. Folder 1 was called Will_Record. On August 19th, 2024, Kenneth Pruitt asked my grandfather to come to his office alone for 40 minutes before I was allowed back into the room. 2 women from the building. Neither of them related to us, neither of them named in the will. Signed as witnesses. Pruitt set a small camera on the credenza. When I came back in, my grandfather was sitting at the end of the conference table in his blue cardigan, his hands folded over a yellow legal pad. Pruitt asked him what he owned. "My house in Bridgewater," Grandpa said. "My savings, my investments, my books, my wife Helen's things, and the right to decide where they go." Pruitt asked him who he wanted to inherit. "Marnie," Grandpa said. Pruitt asked him why. Grandpa looked directly into the camera because she has spent years caring for me and has never asked me for $1. Because my son and his wife have spent those same years asking me for money, trying to move me out of my house, and trying to get me to sign papers I did not want to sign. This is my choice. Marnie did not ask me to make it. Then Pruitt asked him whether he understood that leaving everything to me meant Douglas and Cynthia would receive nothing. Grandpa smiled once. "I understand that perfectly." He signed his will after that. The witnesses signed. Pruitt notarized the execution page. Then Grandpa looked at me and said, "Now you can come back in, Marnie Bird." Folder 2 was the loans. My grandfather sat at his desk at home and read every entry in the yellow notebook into my phone camera. 14 loans, every date, every dollar, every excuse. He ended the recording by saying, "This is not a lawsuit. This is a record for my granddaughter, so she knows. And so they cannot deny. Folder 3 was the audio from Pamela Bremer's recorder. Folder 4 was the hospital incident file from March 2021. Maggie O'Donnell's report, the preserved security clip from room 211, and the quitclaim papers my father had brought into the hospital. Folder 5 did not exist yet. He left that slot empty. He said, "Sweetheart, the last folder is for you. It will be ready when I am." He was right. If you've ever sat at a hospital bed alone, while a whole family stayed away on purpose, comment below and tell me where you were. Tell me the year I read every one of these. I don't know how to explain why that matters to me. It just does. In the 4 years between that first loan and the last, my parents came back to my grandfather's door 13 more times. $8,000 for taxes, $12,000 for an investment opportunity, $14,000 for my cousin Vivian's non-existent graduate program. That one bought my mother a Range Rover, white with the cream interior. $11,000 for a remodel, $7,000 for a kitchen island in Larchmont, $9,000 for what my father called a deal on a vineyard share, $6,000 for emergency car repairs on 2 cars they did not own, $22,000 to buy out a partner at my father's accounting firm who, I later confirmed by quietly calling the firm, had never been a partner. $15,000 for a tax issue with the state of New York that I checked 3 months later by looking up the New York Department of Taxation public docket. There was no issue. $10,000 for a family medical bill. There were no family medical bills outside of my grandfather's, and he was paying his own. Every visit was the same. They rang the bell. My grandfather opened the door. He smiled the same warm smile. He led them to the dining table. They asked him about his health. They told him a story. The story had a problem in it. The problem had a number. My grandfather walked into his office. He came back with a check. He kissed my mother on the cheek. He shook my father's hand. He sat down, and he wrote in the yellow notebook. Every visit, when they left, my mother would touch the doorframe on her way out and say, "Thank you, Pop. You're our hero." Every visit, my father would say, "We'll get it back to you by spring." Every visit they never did. I started cooking dinner during the visits. I learned to set my expression. I learned not to look at my grandfather while he wrote the checks. He did not want me to react. He had told me on the porch in March of 2023 that he wanted them to come. That every visit was a brick. A brick in what, Pop? I had asked. He smiled. In the wall they don't know they're walking into. The 14th visit came on December 9th, 2025. My grandfather had been thin for a year. He was thinner now. His cardiologist had told us very gently in October that we were probably in the last 6 months. I had not told my parents because they had not asked. My grandfather had told me to keep it that way. They came to the door at 2 in the afternoon. They had not called first. My mother was wearing camel cashmere and a new diamond tennis bracelet. My father was wearing the same blue blazer he had worn to push the quitclaim deed across the table almost 5 years before. They asked about his health. He said, "Tired today, Cynthia. I'll sit." She kissed his forehead. The kiss was perfunctory. "Pop," she said, "we have a quick favor. The favor was $18,500. A real estate deal, last minute, couldn't pass it up. A foreclosure in West Hartford. Just unbelievable. We'll triple it in 6 months. This is the kind of thing you do once. My grandfather walked slowly into his office. I held my breath. He came back with his checkbook. He wrote out $18,500. He handed it to my father. My mother kissed him on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Pop. You're our—" "Cynthia," he said. She stopped. "When can we sell this cottage?" she asked. "After. Just thinking ahead, you won't need it. The market in Bridgewater is hot." My grandfather put his hand on the back of the dining chair. He steadied himself. He looked at her and he said, very kindly, very clearly, "I am still in it, Cynthia." She blushed. She left. That night, my grandfather sat down at the kitchen table and he opened the yellow notebook for what would turn out to be the last entry. He wrote, "December 2025, D and C, $18,500. West Hartford foreclosure. Asked when they could sell the house, while I was sitting in it." He closed the book. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. They had not been wet once in all the entries, in all the visits, in all the years. "Marnie Bird," he said. "Yes, Pop. After Christmas, I'd like you to film one more thing, just for you." I filmed it in his bedroom on January 4th, 2026. He sat propped up on 3 pillows, his old reading glasses on, his blue cardigan buttoned to the top. The morning sun was coming through the lace curtain Helen had hung in 1972. He looked into the camera. "Marnie Bird," he said, "if you are watching this, then I am gone. Don't be sad about that. I had 84 good years, and the best of them were the last 5, with you. Listen to me now. When they come to the reading of the will, and they will come, don't argue with them. Don't explain, don't apologize. Just open the USB. Mr. Pruitt will know what to do. You don't have to fight for any of this. I already did, years ago, with pencil and a yellow notebook." He smiled. "And sweetheart, keep the cat. He's better company than most relatives." He winked. The video ended. Cricket, who was actually on the bed when we filmed it, headbutted my grandfather's hand the second the camera went off. My grandfather laughed. That was the last laugh of his I ever recorded. He drank his tea after. He asked me to read to him from a book about Ulysses Grant that he had been working through for 2 months. I read for 40 minutes. He fell asleep with his hand on Cricket's back. I closed the book. I set it on the nightstand. I tucked the quilt over both of them. I went downstairs and I sat at the kitchen table with the yellow notebook open in front of me. I read every entry. I read every name. I read every dollar. I did not cry. I made the kind of tea my grandfather liked, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, the smallest splash of milk, and I drank it standing at the counter looking out the window at the dark maple tree, listening for cars. There were no cars. I was 31. I had not spoken to my mother in 44 days. I had not spoken to my father in 28. I had given up an ICU career, a city apartment, a relationship I had let slide because I could no longer commute back and forth, and a life in which my future had been wide enough to be uncertain. I had not given up anything. That is the sentence I want you to understand. I had not given up anything. I had been given a grandfather for 5 extra years. And in return, I had been given the version of myself who could sit at a kitchen table at midnight and read 14 entries in a yellow notebook and not flinch. That, it turned out, was who I had been all along. Folder 3 arrived 11 days before he died. I was in the kitchen washing dishes on the afternoon of February 17th, 2026. My father had stopped by. "Just for an hour, Pop, we won't tire you," and was sitting in the living room, his iPhone face up on the coffee table next to his coffee. My grandfather had nodded off in the recliner mid-conversation, which was happening more and more. I came into the room with 2 mugs. My father was scrolling on his phone when it lit up with a green message banner across the lock screen. He saw me see it and flipped the phone face down. But the preview had stayed on long enough. The contact was Sandra Beck, my mother's colleague at Bridgewater Realty. The message read, "How fast can we list the house once he's out? Sin thinks 60 days, but I think we can push for less. Comps." I did not touch his phone. I did not need to. Before the screen went dark, I lifted my own phone and took one photograph of the notification exactly as it appeared. His number, her name, the date, the time, and the message. When my father came back from the bathroom, he sat down across from me. He picked up his phone. He scrolled. He said, "You know, sweetheart, I've been thinking. When the time comes, you shouldn't have to handle the whole estate alone. We can help. I have a guy." I smiled at him. "Sure, Dad," I said. He left an hour later. He kissed my grandfather on the head. Henry was still asleep, and said, "Love you, Pop." I walked him to the door. I shut it. I went into the office and emailed Kenneth Pruitt the photograph, the date, the time, and a short description of where I had been standing when it appeared. "This is folder 3, I wrote. He answered 11 minutes later. "Received, logged. Do not contact Sandra. Do not touch Douglas's phone again." I went back to the kitchen and made my grandfather his evening tea. He woke up. He drank it. He asked me what was for dinner. I told him chicken pot pie. He smiled. He said, "Marnie Bird, I am so tired." I said, "I know, Pop. You can rest soon." He nodded. 11 days later, at 4:22 in the morning, on February 28th, 2026, he died in his sleep. I was holding his hand. Cricket was at his feet. The radiator was hissing. The wind was in the maple. There were no cars on the road. He was safe. My mother and father were on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship somewhere off the coast of St. Lucia. I called them at 6 a.m. My mother picked up on the 8th ring. "Marnie, what time is it?" "Mom, Grandpa died." There was a pause. She said, "Oh, sweetheart, what time was it?" 4:22. She said, Oh. Well, honey, we're at sea. We can't get back. Your father booked this in advance. We can't lose what we paid." "Mom, we'll be back the 16th. Plan the service for the 20th. I said, "The service is the 4th. She said, "Then we'll miss it." I hung up. At 12:40 that afternoon, Vivian texted me a screenshot from my mother's public account. Cynthia was in a yellow sundress on the deck of the ship, holding a margarita with salt in the rim. The caption said, "Freedom." I looked at it once. Then I put my phone face down and finished choosing the hymn my grandfather had wanted. We held the funeral on March 4th, 2026, at the small Presbyterian church in Cheshire, where my grandparents had been married in 1968. 30 people came. Larry Bremer gave the eulogy. He read a Lincoln letter my grandfather had loved. Pamela Bremer sang "Be Thou My Vision." Vivian flew in from Pittsburgh. Maggie O'Donnell, the hospice nurse from that first night, came in uniform on her lunch break and sat in the back pew. Kenneth Pruitt sat in the third row, his hands folded in his lap. My parents were not there. When the casket went into the ground, I was the only Whitlock at the grave. That night I drove home, in the dark. I unlocked the front door. Cricket met me. I sat on the couch in my black dress. I did not cry. I went into the office. I opened the safe my grandfather had taught me to open. I took out the USB. I put it in the inside pocket of my blazer. 3 weeks later, that blazer would walk into Kenneth Pruitt's office. My parents flew home on March 16th, 2026. They had not slept on the plane. My mother called me at 4 in the afternoon from the back of an Uber. "Marnie," she said, "Mr. Pruitt's office sent us the will reading, March 24th. You will be there." "Yes, Mom. You are not to do anything with the house before that meeting." "I'm not. You are not to throw away anything that belongs to us. There is nothing in this house that belongs to you, Mom." She hung up. My father called me at 9 that night. "Sweetheart, listen. I know you've been a lot of help with Pop. We appreciate it. But the house is going to need to be sold. The money is going to need to be split. And we want to do this without lawyers. All right? Family doesn't need lawyers." "Dad, you already have a lawyer," I said. "His name is Brent Halloran. He emailed Mr. Pruitt yesterday." There was a silence. He said, "How did you know that?" "Because Mr. Pruitt told me." He hung up. On March 18th at 9:10 in the evening, my father drove up to the house unannounced. I watched his headlights from the porch window. I did not open the door. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. He rang the bell 3 times. He shouted once, "Marnie, this is my father's house." I sat on the stairs with Cricket, and I listened to him breathe through the door. Eventually, he drove away. On March 20th, Kenneth Pruitt called. He said Brent Halloran had requested a copy of the will and sent written notice that Douglas and Cynthia intended to challenge it once Pruitt offered it for probate. "What did you give him?" I asked. "The will," Pruitt said. "Not the USB." "Good. Marnie, are you ready?" Yes, I was not ready. On the night of March 23rd, Larry came over. He brought a casserole that Pam had made. We sat at the kitchen table and we didn't speak much. At one point, Larry put his hand on top of mine. His hands were old. They were spotted. His knuckles were big. He said, "Marnie Bird, your grandfather got ready for this for 3 years. He didn't do it to punish them. He did it so that they could learn, for once, for what it costs when you treat people like they're invisible. He wanted them to see him. Tomorrow, you let his voice do that. You don't have to." I nodded. He kissed my forehead. He went home. I went upstairs and stood in front of the mirror at midnight in my grandmother's bathroom. I brushed my hair. I braided it. I laid my blazer over the chair. I tucked the USB into the inside pocket. I whispered to nobody. 5 years of silence. I whispered 1 USB. I whispered 6 folders. I shut off the light. I slept 4 hours. The conference room of Pruitt, Vance and Associates is on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Pratt Street in Hartford. The walnut table seats 12. The morning sun comes in through 3 tall windows that face east. On Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, at 10 in the morning, the people who walked into that conference room were Kenneth Pruitt, my grandfather's lawyer and the executor named in his will, my grandfather's best friend, Larry Bremer, my grandfather's niece, my cousin, Vivian Whitlock Greer, in from Pittsburgh, the hospice nurse from the first night, Maggie O'Donnell, in her street clothes, my father, Douglas, my mother, Cynthia, my father's lawyer, Brent Halloran, and me. We took our seats. My mother sat across from me. She was wearing black. She had not been wearing black at the funeral she did not attend, but she was wearing black now. She had a tan from the cruise. She had a fresh manicure. She had the same diamond tennis bracelet she had been wearing on December 9th. Brent Halloran was a tall, polished man in a dark gray suit. He had a leather portfolio in front of him. He was smiling. In that practiced way attorneys smile when they think the room is about to roll over. This was not a court hearing. It was the estate conference Kenneth Pruitt had called before offering Henry's will for probate, because he knew exactly who intended to fight it. Pruitt opened a slim folder. He did not look at my parents. He looked at the table. The last will and testament of Henry Allen Whitlock, he said, dated August 19th, 2024, was executed in this office before two witnesses with no interest in the estate. Mr. Whitlock also asked me to preserve a contemporaneous video record of the signing. It contains the following bequests. He read, "To my friend Lawrence Bremer, my chess set, and my collection of Civil War correspondence." Larry nodded. "To Hartford Hospice, a charitable gift of $50,000. My father stiffened. "To my granddaughter, Marnie Ann Whitlock, the residence at 14 Old Mill Road, Bridgewater, Connecticut, valued at approximately $865,000. The residuary cash and investment assets, totaling $1,107,200 on the most recent statement, and the contents of the residence." He set the page down. My mother said, "No." I reached into my blazer. I took out the black USB. I set it on the walnut table. I slid it toward Pruitt. "Folder 1, I said. Pruitt inserted the drive into the laptop. He opened a file labeled will_record. My grandfather's face filled the screen. For 12 minutes, the room watched him answer Kenneth Pruitt's questions in his own voice. He named his house. He named his money. He named me. He said I had never asked him for $1. He said my parents had asked him for money, tried to move him out of his home, and tried to put papers in front of him when he was weak. Then Pruitt's voice on the recording asked him the question that mattered. "Henry, do you understand that leaving your estate to Marnie means Douglas and Cynthia receive nothing?" My grandfather looked straight into the lens. "I understand that perfectly." The recording ended. Brent Halloran did not smile anymore. He stood up slowly. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "I need a recess." My father said, "Brent." Brent did not look at him. "I need 5 minutes with my clients." He took my parents into the hallway. Through the glass panel, I watched him point once at the laptop and once at the signed will in front of Pruitt. My mother shook her head. My father sat down in the hallway chair and put both hands over his face. 5 minutes later, Brent came back alone. He did not sit down. "Douglas, Cynthia," he said. I cannot prepare or recommend a will contest after what I have just seen. Mr. Whitlock's capacity, intent, and independent execution are documented. You need separate advice about anything else in these materials. My mother stood up. Brent, you can't just walk out. I can, he said quietly. And I am. He picked up his portfolio. He walked out. The door clicked behind him. Pruitt continued. To my son, Douglas Henry Whitlock, and his wife, Cynthia M. Whitlock. Nothing. With the following note, which I am instructed to read aloud. Pruitt unfolded a single piece of paper. The handwriting was my grandfather's. He read, to my son and his wife. Thank you for showing me while I was still alive exactly who you are. The kindness I gave you was a gift, not a deposit. I have made my choice. I have made it carefully, with witnesses and with evidence. In the event you cannot accept it, be well. Be honest if you can. Henry, my mother stood up. No, she screamed. He was our father. He was our father. You understand me? You can't. Brent. Brent Halloran put a hand on her wrist. Cynthia, sit down, please. She sat. She was shaking. My father was very pale. Brent Halloran cleared his throat. Mr. Pruitt, my clients will be filing a formal contest on grounds of testamentary capacity and undue influence. Mr. Whitlock was 84, with congestive heart failure, in the daily care of his sole beneficiary. This will is not going to stand. I reached into my blazer. I took out the USB. I set it on the table. I slid it the 8 inches across the walnut, and it stopped in front of Mr. Pruitt. I said very quietly, press play. Pruitt slid the USB into the open laptop. He turned the laptop so it faced the long axis of the table. He opened a folder labeled 01_loans. He clicked the video. My grandfather's face filled the screen. I am Henry Whitlock. I am 84 years old. I am not under duress. I am of sound mind. These are the loans I have made to my son, Douglas, and his wife, Cynthia. My mother made a sound like the air leaving a room. Brent Halloran's smile did not move yet. For 24 minutes, Henry Whitlock read. He read every date. He read every amount. He read every reason my parents had given. He read every name. 14 loans. $168,400. 0 repaid. When the video ended, my father said, "Those were loans. We were going to pay him back. Pop knew that." Pruitt clicked folder 02_audio. He pressed play. For 6 minutes, the conference room listened to glasses clink, to laughter, to Cynthia Whitlock's voice, 58 years old and warm with Chardonnay, telling her wine club, "Honestly, I pray he goes soon. Dragging this out is cruel to us." My mother did not stand. She did not scream. She put her hands flat on the table. She stared at the audio waveform on the laptop screen, as if she could push the sound back into the speakers. Vivian was crying. Brent Halloran's smile was gone. Pruitt clicked folder 03_texts. A screenshot filled the screen. A green message bubble, my father's number. The contact, Sandra Beck, Bridgewater Realty. The date, February 17th, 2026. The message, how fast can we list the house once he's out? Sin thinks 60 days, but I think we can push for less. Comps? Brent Halloran stood up. Mr. Pruitt, I would like a brief recess. I need to step into the hallway with my clients. Brent, my father said. Brent did not look at him. 5 minutes. He walked out into the hallway. He did not take my parents with him. He shut the door behind himself. We could see him through the glass panel. He pulled out his phone. He made one call. It lasted 90 seconds. He hung up. He stood with his back to us for almost a full minute, breathing. He came back in. He did not sit down. Douglas, Cynthia. He looked at them both. I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. I'll be sending a notice in writing within the hour. I cannot continue. My mother said, Brent, what? No, you can't. I can, he said. Goodbye. He picked up his portfolio. He walked out. The door clicked behind him. My mother turned to me. Her eyes were red. You planned this, she whispered. No, Mom, I said. Grandpa did. Pruitt opened folder 2. My grandfather appeared again, seated at his desk with the yellow notebook in front of him. For 24 minutes, he read every entry, every date, every dollar, every excuse. 14 loans, $168,400. 0 repaid. When the video ended, my father said, those were loans. We were going to pay him back. Pruitt opened folder 3. For 6 minutes, the conference room listened to glasses clink, to laughter, to Cynthia Whitlock's voice warm with Chardonnay, saying, honestly, I pray he goes soon. Dragging this out is cruel. To us. My mother did not stand. She put both hands flat on the table and stared at the laptop screen. Pruitt opened folder 4. The hospital security clip from March 3rd, 2021 filled the screen. My father, in a blue blazer, leaned over my grandfather's hospital bed with papers in his hand. Maggie O'Donnell entered the frame and asked Henry whether he wanted the conversation documented. Maggie spoke quietly from the end of the table. That was a quitclaim deed. Douglas was trying to get a man recovering from a cardiac admission to transfer his home that day. Henry said no. I filed an incident report. Mr. Pruitt asked the hospital to preserve the record while Henry was still alive. My father looked at the table. My mother opened her mouth. Cynthia, he said very quietly, stop talking. Pruitt opened folder 5. A photograph of a lock screen notification filled the screen. My father's number? Sandra Beck, Bridgewater Realty. February 17th, 2026. How fast can we list the house once he's out? Sin thinks 60 days, but I think we can push for less. Comps. My father closed his eyes. There was nothing left for either of them to say. Then Pruitt looked at me. There is one final file, he said. I shook my head once. You don't have to play this one, I said. He asked me to. Pruitt opened a file called 4_Marnie. My grandfather's voice filled the conference room. Marnie Bird, if you are watching this, then I am gone. Don't be sad about that. I had 85 good years, and the best of them were the last 5 with you. Listen to me now. Don't argue with them. Don't explain. Don't apologize. You don't have to fight for any of this. I already did. Years ago, with pencil and a yellow notebook. A pause, the wink, the cat. And, sweetheart, keep the cat. He's better company than most relatives. The recording ended. The conference room was silent for what I later timed at 22 seconds. Mr. Pruitt turned the laptop back to himself. He folded his hands. Pruitt folded his hands. Henry left no provision for either of you. A contest would not create an inheritance. It would ask a probate court to examine the record you have just seen. The video of his decision, the loan record, the hospital incident, the audio, and the text about selling his home before he was gone. He looked at my parents. Marnie has not asked me to pursue any separate claim about the attempted deed or the loans. Today, he closed the folder. My mother began to cry. They were not graceful tears. She put her face in her hands. My father did not move. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the table. He looked, finally, at me. He opened his mouth. I shook my head once. He closed it. There is a kind of silence between two people who used to share a Christmas tree and a last name and a passcode. When one of them has finally understood that the other has been a stranger for 30 years. It is not loud. It does not have a sound. It is the moment a sentence you have been about to say all your life finally goes back down your throat because you have realized in the same second that the person you would have said it to never actually existed. We sat in that silence for a moment. Then I stood up. I picked up my blazer. I tucked the USB back into the inside pocket. I said to no one in particular, "There's a check for $50,000 made out to Hartford Hospice in this folder. I'll be hand-delivering it Friday." I walked out of the conference room. There are people in your family who are not family. Boundaries are not punishment. They are the last respect you can give yourself. And sometimes the last lesson you can offer the people who never learned the first one. If you are listening to this and you have been carrying a no-contact decision, sitting with it for months because you keep hoping for a phone call that never comes, this is your sign. You are not the one who left. You are the one who finally stopped waiting. Ever so, I moved into my grandfather's house, my house, the following weekend. Cricket claimed the south-facing windowsill in the kitchen. I painted the upstairs guest room a soft yellow, the color of the legal pads Mr. Pruitt used. I delivered the $50,000 check to Hartford Hospice on a Friday morning in early April. They named a small inpatient room after my grandfather. I cried in my car in their parking lot for 15 minutes. I set up the Henry Whitlock History Scholarship at Bridgewater High School. $2,000 a year for a senior planning to study history in college. The first recipient is a girl named Rosa, whose great-grandparents were teachers. I drove down to her award ceremony in May. I shook her hand. I did not give a speech. I told her quietly, "He would have liked you." She said, "Thank you, Ms. Whitlock." I drove home. I cried at the same stop sign on Route 8 where my grandfather had taught me, at 16, that a four-way stop is the closest thing in life to a contract between strangers. You wait your turn. You trust the other person to wait theirs. And most of the time, it works. My parents did not call. In the second week of April, my mother was asked, politely, to step down from the Bridgewater Country Club. The wine club had heard. My father lost two of his largest accounting clients in May. One of them wrote him a one-line email that read, "I no longer have confidence in your judgment. Vivian comes for dinner once a month. Larry comes for coffee on Wednesdays. Pamela sends pies. Maggie O'Donnell sent a card last week that said, "Only thinking of him." Some nights I sit on the front porch and Cricket sits on my lap and I listen. I listen to the radiator. I listen to the wind in the maple. I listen for cars. There are no cars. For 5 years, I thought I was the one taking care of him. It turns out he was teaching me, one last time, with a pencil and a yellow notebook and a USB he never lived to see, how to let go of a thing that was never my real family. I am safe at his house. I always was.